My husband finally severed connections with his toxic mom and sister after they insisted we sacrifice our home for my unemployed sister-in-law and her family. My in-laws have this really unhealthy dynamic with my partner, and it's starting to take a serious toll on my life. During my childhood, my husband stood out as my favorite, the one who could do no wrong, and my mother-in-law had a special bond with him. Ethan mentioned that since his dad was always caught up with work, he and his mom ended up hanging out a lot. I've observed that my mother-in-law doesn't treat his sister, Megan, on the same level as others. I'm pretty sure my mother-in-law cares about both her kids, but I've noticed she seems to favor my husband more often. I'm pretty sure Megan had similar feelings while growing up, which is why my husband has always tried to step in as a supportive older brother and has consistently been there for her. Honestly, there were times when Megan and my mother-in-law acted so absurdly that it was just too much to handle. So like, when we first started dating, Ethan had just graduated from college, and my in-laws, including Megan, were all living together in one house. My in-laws offered my husband a completely separate space so he could enjoy his own privacy and invite whoever he wanted. That's the reason he sometimes asked me over to his place to crash for the night. But there were multiple occasions in the morning when Megan would barge into our room while we were still asleep, totally skipping the whole knocking thing. So as you might expect, we weren't exactly dressed to impress, but she just rolled with it, chatting with Ethan about the most random stuff like it was no big deal. I found it really odd since I felt uneasy about her seeing me in my lingerie. Look, I get it. Ethan was with his family, so I should have seen this coming. But seriously, is it too much to ask to knock before just walking in? I get that siblings can have a close bond, but honestly, she and I weren't that familiar when Ethan and I began dating, so I found it pretty rude. I had a chat with Ethan and let him know that I wouldn't be coming over unless he put a lock on his door. He was on board with that. So as you might expect, Megan tried to barge into the room the next morning but failed miserably, and then she started going off on us about why the door was locked. She started banging and shaking the door, pleading with her brother to open up. Ethan finally opened the door, and she burst in, demanding to know why he had locked it in the first place. As soon as she spotted me, she started pointing and going off on him, questioning if it was all because of this skank. I was totally taken aback by how harsh she sounded. Ethan mentioned to Megan that he was thinking about putting in the door lock, but Megan wasn't really buying it. She snapped at him, reminding him that they were siblings and that there should be no secrets between them. Ethan claimed he had no secrets and said he installed the lock to keep her from barging in while we were asleep, which was honestly pretty unsettling. Megan suddenly turned her head in my direction and shouted that it was all my fault, claiming I was getting in the way of her and her brother. I couldn't handle it anymore, being the non-confrontational person I am, so I made an excuse to head to the restroom. I could hear her shouting while Ethan was trying to soothe her down. So when she finally dipped, Ethan swooped in to offer some comfort. He said sorry for what she did and let me know that he would talk to her again so she could say sorry to me too. When I showed up the next weekend, Megan was all apologies, giving me a pretty weak excuse. She said she had to talk to Ethan urgently and thought it would be a good idea for me to come in. Ethan firmly told her to stop bothering us, and she nodded in agreement, looking a bit embarrassed. Even though this situation seemed to be resolved, it wasn't the only odd behavior she showed towards Ethan. Whenever Ethan and I had a disagreement, even over something as minor as movies, Megan would chime in, suggesting he should find someone with similar interests, implying that we weren't a good match. Ethan shot her a disapproving glance, but she just flashed a smirk in response. So there was this episode where Megan started throwing some really awkward questions my way, trying to dig into my background and get the scoop on my life. Ethan and I had been upfront about our history from the start, but I just wasn't ready to talk about it with his sister. No matter what I thought, she would throw questions at me like, why did your ex decide to end things with you? Were you not a good match for him? It's the kind of thing someone might say like, my brother's ex was way better looking than you. All of these questions and remarks came up when it was just the two of us. I started to get the feeling that she was trying to mess with me, dragging me down. I started off staying quiet, but as things unfolded, I reached my breaking point. So there was this moment when I shot back at her, teasing, saying that I actually preferred my ex-boyfriend's family over Ethan's since they weren't filled with those nosy, overbearing types. Megan was totally caught off guard by my response, leaving her momentarily speechless. Despite the odd dynamics Megan had with my husband, my mother-in-law was just as unique. When I first came into Ethan's life, my mother-in-law totally brushed me off. But as soon as she realized we were in it for the long haul, she started acting like I was trying to take her son from her. At dinners and family gatherings, she would totally act like I was invisible, just ignoring me on purpose. Ethan noticed this from time to time and attempted to engage her in conversation, but she remained the same. My mother-in-law called me stuck up and spoiled simply because my parents chose to send me to an international school, while she taught at a community school. I've heard that she attempted to convince Ethan not to marry me, suggesting he should find someone better. Luckily, my partner didn't mind her perspective and went ahead with the proposal anyway. My mother-in-law and Megan were totally taken aback when they found out that Ethan had popped the question. They both reached out, insisting it was a terrible choice, and that since Ethan wasn't taking their advice, I should end things and give back the ring. I thought this was really odd and said no, pointing out that they were overstepping by asking me to do something like that when I was in love with Ethan and wanted to be with him forever. After they figured out that convincing me was a lost cause, my mother-in-law finally gave in, saying I should aim to be the best wife for him and take care of him just like she had for so long. I was pretty taken aback, but I made an effort not to let her comments get to me too much. Megan, meanwhile, called me an opportunist and insisted her brother should be with someone of higher status. She actually threatened to spill the beans before our wedding to make sure Ethan wouldn't go through with it. After this chat, I hit up Ethan to discuss all the details. He couldn't believe how rude they were being to me. He threw down the gauntlet, but my mother-in-law and Megan just kept insisting that I wasn't the right match for him. Ethan said I should just ignore them, promising that his love for me didn't depend on what they thought. Even with his comforting words, it really hit me hard that his family wouldn't accept me. Ethan and I had made the decision to fund our wedding ourselves, so when my mother-in-law suggested covering half of the expenses, we graciously turned it down. Even with Ethan's comforting words, I couldn't shake the feeling that his family wouldn't accept me. Ethan and I had made it clear that we were handling our own wedding expenses, so when my mother-in-law suggested covering half of the costs, we graciously turned it down. Ethan took the time to explain how much effort we had put into saving for this special day. Rather than feeling happy for us, she just got angrier and started expressing to Ethan how upset she was that he didn't need her anymore. But Ethan's dad seemed pretty happy with us. In contrast to his sister and mother, his dad was super chill and totally cool with our relationship. After my mother-in-law kept voicing her concerns to Ethan, we decided to meet her halfway by suggesting that she take charge of organizing the rehearsal dinner for us. She was on board, and we totally valued her kindness. But as the wedding day got closer, things started to go in a totally different direction. The first time it happened was when Megan decided to crash our dinner, expressing to Ethan just how much she missed him. Ethan and I were on our own after getting engaged, so we figured she really wanted to hang out with her brother. We were on the same page, and Ethan straight up asked me if I was cool with having dinner with her. I gave in, not wanting to come off as rude to my future sister-in-law. As we were having dinner, Megan suddenly launched into a rant about her hatred for cheating partners, insisting that cheaters were just worthless scum. We looked at her, intrigued about where she was going with this. Suddenly, she locked eyes with me and bluntly asked what it felt like to be a worthless piece of garbage. I was totally confused when Megan started going off, claiming I was cheating on her with my colleague Nathan. Ethan, equally confused, inquired about what she meant by her statement. Megan enthusiastically pulled out photos of me and a colleague, brandishing them and insisting that she had caught me in the act. I was puzzled as to why she thought I was cheating on Ethan when I knew I had always been faithful to him. Scrolling through the photos, they seemed completely harmless. Nathan and I were definitely tight as colleagues, but that was mainly because we both joined the team at the same time and had each other's backs whenever we messed up, keeping our manager off our case. Nathan actually had a girlfriend, and Ethan was totally aware of it. I don't have a lock on my phone, and I've always been transparent with Ethan about my coworkers. Megan had twisted these nice moments captured in photos into something entirely different, proof of a made-up relationship. Honestly, they were nowhere near that. Her baseless accusations really got under my skin, especially since it was clear she was trying to tarnish my reputation and mess with my relationship with Ethan. Before I had a chance to stand up for myself, Ethan, clearly taken aback and visibly distressed, stepped in to assist. He asked Megan why she was trailing me and snapping photos of me with my colleagues in public without their consent. Upon hearing this, Megan started justifying her actions, insisting that her curiosity about me stemmed from my different social standing and she feared I was after Ethan's wealth. Ethan straight up told her that her accusations were totally unfounded and that she was just stirring up unnecessary drama. He attempted to talk sense into her, urging her to quit with the falsehoods and trying to ruin what we had. But Megan was adamant that Ethan needed to see the blatant affair happening right under his nose. I made it clear that we were just colleagues, but Megan kept pushing her claims. As her responsibilities piled up, the atmosphere turned tense. I finally reached my breaking point and told her I was going to file a police report for her illegal photography and stalking behavior. Her expression shifted to one of pure fear as she asked if I was actually being serious. I let her know that I had all the proof. She intentionally followed me around and snapped these photos without my consent, trying to defame me with absurd falsehoods. Megan shot a look at Ethan and then turned to me, insisting she had done everything to look out for her brother and that it really wasn't a big deal. She started begging Ethan to talk to me, anxious that if I went ahead with a complaint, it could put her career and future at risk. I made it clear to her that this was a moment for her to focus on her own rescue. Megan asked me what I was looking for. I told her straight up that I wouldn't go after the complaint as long as she stayed out of my life. At that moment, Megan was completely out of options for getting out of the situation. She turned to her brother for backup, but Ethan had my back, telling her she should appreciate that I was ready to move on, considering how clearly wrong her actions were. Megan finally decided to keep her distance, and we haven't exchanged a word since then. Ethan is still in touch with her, but she hasn't said a word to me since. Right before our wedding, during the rehearsal dinner, something else happened. My mother-in-law, who was adamant about organizing the meal, turned down our offer to help in any way. She said she'd handle it all. When we got there, it was clear that the setup was nowhere near what we expected. The rehearsal dinner featured paper tablecloths draped over picnic tables, accompanied by some rather cold Italian food. My mother-in-law was in a bad mood the whole dinner, totally killing the vibe. She was hitting the bottle hard and acting out around the guests, constantly going on about how she couldn't wait for the wedding to wrap up and how stressful it had been, even though she hadn't put in any cash or helped with the planning at all. In the end, my father-in-law totally lost it and had to take her away. Megan tried to defend her mom's behavior, but my father-in-law wasn't having any of it. As you can imagine, the whole situation turned into a disaster, and I started to fear that both my mother-in-law and Megan would ruin the wedding the following day. That night, Ethan and I totally had our first disagreement. I made it clear that he had to uninvite Megan and his mom, because honestly, their behavior suggested they would definitely try to steal the spotlight at the wedding. My husband was really fired up, insisting that his dad would be there and wouldn't let them off the hook. Feeling exasperated, I made it clear that if he didn't take them off the guest list, there would be no wedding the next day. Ethan looked completely shocked by what I asked, and even though I realized how over the top I sounded, I couldn't shake off my worry about their potential reaction. I really didn't want to feel humiliated again in front of my family and friends on our wedding day. Ethan really didn't have strong boundaries, but I was hoping this ultimatum would help him see just how much his family was getting in the way of our relationship. Luckily, Ethan got it and made the right call. He rang up his dad first thing in the morning to let him know that his mom and sister were no longer invited. Robert seemed totally unfazed and assured Ethan that he would guarantee my mother-in-law and Megan wouldn't just pop up there out of the blue. Right after we talked with Robert, my mother-in-law and Megan started reaching out to Ethan nonstop, seemingly trying to convince him to let them come to the wedding. Ethan firmly expressed that he wasn't okay with them being around due to the way they had treated me during our relationship. After hearing this, my mother-in-law started to blame me for being a bad influence and meddling in her relationship with her son. Megan tried to make her case, but Ethan was totally set on his choice. I really felt bad that Robert couldn't make it to our wedding because of his family obligations. I honestly felt a bit bad about having to lay down the ultimatum. All my feelings of regret disappeared when I found out from a few of Ethan's cousins that Megan and my mother-in-law planned to wear white dresses to our wedding. The cousins told me that in their family Telegram group, which included only the women, Megan suggested that everyone should wear white too, arguing that there was no reason for the bride to be the only one in that color. I couldn't believe the lengths they would sink to just to cause me pain. Honestly, finding that out made me feel a lot better about them not being invited. Ethan felt a longing for his family, yet he understood my perspective. All in all, our wedding was fantastic and nobody attempted to steal our spotlight. Ever since that day, my mother-in-law and Megan have completely cut off communication with me. And honestly, I'm totally fine with it. Honestly, I wasn't bothered at all that they only invited Ethan over for dinner or special events. Robert, in contrast, was consistently nice to me, and we kept in contact throughout the years. After a lot of hard work and saving, Ethan and I finally managed to buy a new home this year. We were absolutely thrilled to have our very first home, a place that held so much significance for us. So, Ethan's parents and Megan showed up for a low-key welcome party, but I decided to hang out with my own family instead. So here's the thing, my mother-in-law reached out to me out of the blue last month. I was totally caught off guard since my mom and I hadn't had a word since I tied the knot with Ethan. Out of the blue, she asked how I was doing and what was going on in my life. I was totally surprised by her sudden interest, but I kept it cool and responded nicely. She then asked what it was like to live in such a big house with just Ethan and me. Her comments hit hard because Ethan and I had been on a long journey to conceive, but fertility challenges have made it really tough for us. Ethan and I had really struggled with the idea of not having kids, but over time we came to terms with it. When I first heard the news, I told Ethan that if he wanted to marry someone else and start a family, he could go ahead and divorce me. Ethan has always been there for me, reminding me that being childless is perfectly okay as long as we have each other. It was tough because our families knew about it, making my mother-in-law's comment hit even harder. So she just dropped the news that Megan is pregnant again. I couldn't believe it. This would be her third kid. Ethan mentioned that her husband was out of work and didn't believe in contraception, leading to these unexpected pregnancies. Megan's boyfriend was the ultimate couch potato, contributing absolutely nothing to help her or the kids around the house. So Ethan apparently treats Megan like his own personal maid, huh? He never chips in for any of the bills around here. Megan juggles a bunch of part-time gigs, while he just chills and games all day. No matter how many times people have tried to reason with her, Megan just won't end things with him. So my mother-in-law decided to chime in, saying that since Megan couldn't work during her pregnancy, she believed Ethan and I should just give up our apartment because it was too spacious for a couple like us. I was totally taken by surprise by her demand and found it hard to come up with a response. I asked if she was joking, but my mother-in-law insisted she was serious, claiming that Megan and her husband deserved a bigger house. So since she didn't have enough room at her place, she asked if they could join us instead. The heaviness of her news hung in the air while I struggled to maintain my composure amid the emotional chaos. I made it clear to her that this is our home, which we are still financing, and the thought of someone else moving in without our consent is both intrusive and ridiculous. So my mother-in-law mentioned that she already had a chat with Ethan, and he supposedly agreed to this. This felt off since Ethan and I had always been transparent with one another, and I was sure he would have mentioned it if he had decided to let his sister and her family crash with us. I made it clear to my mother-in-law that since the house is co-owned by me and Ethan, he can't just give permission without my say-so. Neither of us would let anyone stay here unless we both gave the thumbs up. I let her know that I'd be happy to host Megan and her husband for a few days if they wanted, but I made it clear that a permanent stay wasn't an option. My mother-in-law, however, started shouting, insisting that as a dutiful daughter-in-law, I had to accommodate Megan and her husband. She promised me that if I went along with her requests, everything that happened before would be wiped clean. In a fit of anger, I sarcastically remarked, sure, I'd be thrilled to let them take our spot. Honestly, we're still on the hook for it, and I just know that if Megan and her husband come over, they won't chip in for the house loan or any of the bills. Why don't you step up and help out with their living costs? It would be awesome if you could just handle the house loan, and we'll take care of everything else. Obviously, with just one job, you're going to need a side gig to handle those home payments. Just curious, when are you planning to pick up that second job? Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law totally lost it, yelling and expressing her frustration. She thought it was wild for me to suggest she contribute to the house loan, and I shot back that it was just as absurd for her to think we should take in Megan's family and let them stay with us. This just made her even angrier, and she kept shouting, while I couldn't help but grin with delight. She finally hung up when she realized I wasn't going to budge on her requests. Not long after, Megan blew up my phone, furious that I had the audacity to ask her mom to chip in for our house loan. She went on to say that she had always suspected I was just after the money. I told her straight up that she was the one trying to mooch off us without pulling her weight. I pointed out that if she was curious about who the real opportunist was, she should take a good look at her own partner, who didn't lift a finger to help her. This seemed to quiet her down. I made it clear to Megan that she could debate with me as much as she liked, but there was no way I was letting her family into our home unless they were on board with helping out with the house loan. She called me out for being heartless and prioritizing cash over family. I finally stood my ground, feeling a wave of relief wash over me as I took charge of my space and refused to back down. Honestly, I can't shake this awful feeling when I think about my ex-husband. I'm just here questioning if my actions have turned me into the villain in this story. Update 1, huge thanks to everyone who's shown their support. So here's the burning question that everyone seems to be fixated on. Why on earth would my mother-in-law insist on such a ridiculous request from us? It's just that she's always acted so entitled. It's obvious my husband has put up with this act for way too long, and it's time for us to have a real talk about it. It's really upsetting to see my mother-in-law twist the truth about her own child just to serve her own interests. My sister-in-law is just a piece in her mother-in-law's game, bending to her every wish since my mother-in-law has always had a soft spot for my husband. Megan just nods along to her mom's words, trying to win some approval too. In this scenario, Megan found herself in a favorable position since she could count on us to cover her expenses and look after her kids while her husband remained inactive. I'm just hanging out until my partner gets back from his work trip so we can chat about things. I'd rather not talk about this on the phone because it's really important. Here's the second update. It's been 5 days since my last update. Like I mentioned before, I was just hanging around waiting for my husband to come back. When he got back, we finally had a chance to sit down and chat. I explained to him that his mother had called and insisted we hand over our house to his sister and her family. Ethan was totally caught off guard, so I laid out the entire story for him. He later claimed that he was completely unaware of any of it. Before he set off on his journey, all his mother had shared with him was the news that his sister was expecting a baby. He was completely in the dark about the whole situation, and he never expected his mother to come up with such outrageous demands. I made it clear that I needed him to talk to his mom and handle the situation because I just couldn't take his family any longer. He was on board with that. Ethan called out his mom, asking her why she had been dishonest with me regarding him. When she was caught in the act, my mother-in-law tried to wiggle out of it, insisting that she hadn't really lied. She mentioned that she was sure Ethan wouldn't mind his sister crashing with us, so she decided to take the initiative and came to me directly. Ethan cut her off and asked why she assumed he would be okay with Megan and her whole family showing up. So my mother-in-law was saying that since Ethan and Megan are tight, it makes sense that he'd want to back her up by letting her family come over. Upon hearing this, I couldn't help but roll my eyes, choosing to stay quiet while Ethan dealt with his mom. Ethan made it clear that he wasn't going to allow Megan, her jobless husband, and their 3 kids to move in with us. He also mentioned that she didn't have the power to force us to look after them. My mother-in-law began shouting, insisting that Megan was in urgent need of help right now. Ethan made it clear that it wasn't our responsibility, and if she really wanted to pitch in, she could take care of Megan on her own. So my mother-in-law mentioned that Robert wasn't keen on having them over at their cozy place, even though we had a bigger house and could totally lend a hand. She really had the nerve to imply that because I don't have kids, helping Megan's children would somehow bring me joy. Whoa, I couldn't believe my eyes. For the first time, I saw Ethan's face actually change color. He exploded at her, insisting she had no right to make such disrespectful comments about me and couldn't leverage that to force me into taking care of Megan's kids. Ethan mentioned that Robert was completely done with Megan, claiming she had become nothing more than a childbirthing machine, and he wanted nothing to do with either of them anymore. My mother-in-law attempted to change her story once more, but Ethan wasn't having any of it. He let her know that he had really tried to maintain a good vibe with them, even after they had disrespected him multiple times, but he just couldn't handle it anymore. My mother-in-law pleaded with him, but Ethan firmly told her that this was our home and I was his wife. Anyone who crossed me also disrespected him, and they had no place in his life. Ethan wrapped up the conversation with those last remarks. Ever since that moment, he hasn't had a word with Megan or his mom. Robert called Ethan over to chat, and after getting the full scoop, he totally got why Ethan had taken such a drastic step. Robert said sorry for his wife's actions, but I let him know it wasn't on him to take the blame. Here's the third update. These past 2 weeks have been quite the ride. Many folks recommended that I set up cameras around the house just in case my mother-in-law and Megan decided to drop by and stir things up. I ended up buying a bunch of cameras online and set them up. Wouldn't you know it, they decided to drop by last weekend, pounding on my door while I was all by myself at home. As soon as I spotted them on the camera, I immediately hit up Ethan, and he said he was on his way. I opened the door and there they stood, my mother-in-law and Megan, both fuming. They asked me to let them in, but I wasn't having it. I told them if they had something to say, they could say it from outside. My mother-in-law started going off on me, claiming I'm heartless, money-hungry, and self-centered. I calmly let her know that this is our place, and they really shouldn't come in without an invitation. She kept going on and on, completely oblivious to the fact that the cameras were capturing it all. I brought up our previous conversation, making it clear that I wasn't going to sacrifice our home for Megan and her family. I told her that if she had more to say, she could hold off until Ethan got back. Megan started shouting, claiming that I was tearing the family apart for no reason, calling me an opportunist, and saying I was trying to steal her brother away from them. I let them know that I was recording everything they said and that I could use the footage to get a legal order if needed. Their eyes went wide with shock when my mother-in-law declared that I wouldn't even think about doing that. I couldn't help but smirk as I told her that if they didn't vacate the property right away, a legal notice would be on its way to them in no time. They were definitely concerned, and Megan kept insisting that I was making a mountain out of a molehill, claiming it wasn't really an issue. Luckily, Ethan showed up right then. He strolled over, casually inquiring about what they were up to. My mother-in-law rushed over to embrace him, but he pushed back and firmly questioned their reason for being there. Megan claimed I was trying to manipulate his life by keeping him away from them, and that they had come to confront me. Ethan made it clear that he was the one who chose to steer clear of any physical contact, and he had no interest in being involved with either of them. My mother-in-law pleaded for forgiveness, but Ethan just told them to get off the property or he'd involve the authorities. They looked genuinely surprised, clearly not expecting him to respond like that. Ethan mentioned that if they ever showed up at our place again, we would call the cops and have them kicked out for good. They took off, completely crushed, but Ethan was over it. I felt a wave of relief when my partner finally stood up for me. Ethan just had a chat with Robert, and he was just as shocked as we were that my mother-in-law and Megan decided to pull a fast one and show up out of the blue. Robert told us we made the right call by not letting them in and was pretty appalled by how they acted. Since Ethan is being so strict about getting them out, I really don't think they'll have the guts to come back to our place. If that happens, I'm reaching out to a lawyer immediately. I'm honestly so relieved that my husband has finally seen how toxic his family really is. Fingers crossed this is my last update on the situation. I'm totally ready to leave this situation behind and just focus on living our lives in peace.